She walked into that restaurant wearing the exact same perfume I'd smelled on my husband's collar 3 weeks ago. The same perfume that made my stomach turn when I did his laundry. The same perfume that haunted my nightmares. And when she smiled at me and said, "You must be Vivienne. I'm your blind date, Seraphina," my entire world stopped spinning on its axis. But I didn't run. I didn't scream. I pulled out her chair, smiled back, and said, "Please, sit down. I've been waiting for someone like you my whole life." She had no idea I knew exactly who she was. And by the end of tonight, she would lose everything she thought she'd stolen from me. Before I tell you how I discovered the darkest betrayal and how I turned it into my greatest triumph, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see love, loyalty, and revenge forever. This is a story you'll want to follow to the very end. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Vivienne Castellanos, and for 12 years I believed I had the perfect marriage. My husband, Dorian, was the kind of man other women envied me for having. Tall, charming, with steel gray eyes that crinkled when he laughed, and hands that could fix anything. A leaky faucet, a broken fence, my broken confidence after a hard day at work. We met at a bookstore in Seattle when I was 24 years old, and still believed that love was something you found in the pages of novels. I was reaching for a worn copy of a poetry collection when another hand reached for the same book. Our fingers touched, and when I looked up, there he was, Dorian Mercer, with his crooked smile and his voice like honey over gravel. "You have excellent taste," he said. "So do you," I replied. That was it. That was the moment I handed over my heart, wrapped it up like a gift, and placed it in the hands of a man who would eventually shatter it into 1,000 pieces. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on the roof of his apartment building, under a sky full of stars that seemed to promise us forever. I said yes before he even finished the question. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in my grandmother's garden, surrounded by roses and the people we loved most. The early years were beautiful in the way young love always is, consuming, passionate, blind to any flaw. Dorian worked as an architect, designing buildings that reached toward the sky. I worked as an event planner, crafting perfect moments for other people's celebrations, while building what I thought was my own perfect life. We bought a house in the suburbs with a red front door and a backyard big enough for the children we planned to have. We adopted a golden retriever named Huxley, who slept at the foot of our bed. We hosted dinner parties and took vacations and made love on lazy Sunday mornings while rain tapped against the windows. For a decade, I was certain I was the luckiest woman alive. The cracks began so small I almost missed them. A late night at the office that turned into late nights every week. Business trips that stretched from 2 days to 5. The way he started sleeping on the edge of the bed instead of wrapped around me. The way he stopped looking at me when I talked. But I made excuses. I rationalized. I told myself that marriage required work, that passion naturally faded, that we were simply settling into a comfortable routine. I blamed his stress at work. I blamed my own busy schedule. I blamed everything except the truth that was staring me right in the face. The first time I smelled that perfume was on a Tuesday evening in March. Dorian had come home late again, claiming a project deadline had kept him at the office. He kissed my forehead, a perfunctory kiss, the kind you give out of habit rather than desire, and went to take a shower. I gathered his clothes for the laundry, And that's when it hit me. The scent was unmistakable. Jasmine and sandalwood and something darker underneath, like smoke or secrets. It was expensive, the kind of perfume that lingered, and it was absolutely not mine. I stood there in our bedroom, holding his shirt to my nose, breathing in the evidence of his betrayal while my heart cracked down the middle. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I folded the shirt, placed it in the hamper, and waited for him to emerge from the shower. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Long," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Just long." He was lying. I knew it as certainly as I knew my own name. But I also knew that accusations without proof would get me nowhere. Dorian was a master of deflection, of turning conversations around until I was the one apologizing for even daring to question him. So I became a detective in my own marriage. Over the following weeks, I watched. I noticed. I documented. The perfume appeared again and again, on his collar, on his skin, once even on his lips when he came home and forgot to shower. His phone, which used to lie carelessly around the house, was now permanently attached to his hand, face down, password protected. He started going to the gym at odd hours. He bought new cologne. He trimmed his beard the way I'd been asking him to for years, but he'd always refused. He was becoming a better version of himself. Just not for me. The confirmation came through his credit card statement. I had always handled our finances. He found it tedious, preferred to leave the numbers to me. So when I saw the charge for $200 at a jewelry store downtown, I felt nothing at first. A gift, I thought. Perhaps he's planning something for our anniversary. But our anniversary was 3 months away, and when I casually mentioned that I'd seen the charge, asking if there was something I should be excited about, he went pale. "It's from my mother's birthday," he said quickly. Too quickly. His mother's birthday was in September. It was March. That night, while Dorian slept beside me, I unlocked his phone using the code I'd memorized by watching his fingers over his shoulder. And there it was. Message after message to someone saved in his contacts simply as S. "I miss you already. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about your body. I love you. I love you. I love you." I read every message, hundreds of them, dating back 18 months. 18 months of lies. 18 months of another woman sharing my husband. 18 months of me playing the fool while he played house with someone else. The messages painted a picture of a relationship that was passionate, consuming, real. He told her things he'd never told me. He made plans with her he'd never made with me. He spoke of a future that didn't include me at all. "Once Vivienne is out of the picture, we can finally be together," one message read. "Just a little longer, my love. Just until I figure out how to leave without losing everything." He wasn't just cheating. He was planning to leave me. He was strategizing how to extract himself from our marriage while keeping his assets, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. And she, this mysterious S, was his accomplice, his confidant, his true partner in everything that mattered. I should have confronted him then. I should have screamed, thrown things, demanded a divorce. But something cold and calculating settled into my bones that night. Something that whispered, "Don't react. Plan." I spent the next 2 weeks learning everything I could about the woman who had stolen my husband. Her name was Seraphina Blackwood. She was 32 years old, a fitness instructor at the exclusive gym downtown, where Dorian had been spending his late nights. She had dark hair that fell in waves to her waist, green eyes that photographs suggested were both beautiful and calculating, and a smile that looked like it could convince you to hand over your wallet and thank her for the privilege. She was also, I learned, newly single. Her profile on a dating app featured those same green eyes, that same dangerous smile, and a bio that read, "Looking for authentic connections with interesting women. Life's too short for small talk." Women. She dated women. And yet she was sleeping with my husband. The hypocrisy would have been laughable if it wasn't destroying my life. I stared at her profile for hours, memorizing every detail, every pose, every carefully curated glimpse into the life of the woman who was helping to dismantle mine. And slowly, a plan began to form. If Seraphina was looking for interesting women, I would become the most interesting woman she'd ever met. I created a profile using photos from before my marriage, before motherhood disappointments and career stress had carved worry lines into my forehead. Photos from when I was young and carefree and hadn't yet learned that love could be a weapon. I gave myself a different name, Lydia Monroe, and crafted a bio designed to intrigue her. Recently untangled from a complicated situation, looking for someone who understands that the most beautiful things in life are often the most dangerous. I matched with her on a Thursday. She messaged me first. "Your bio speaks to my soul. Coffee sometime?" I replied, "I prefer wine and danger." She sent a laughing emoji, then a winking one, then an address for a wine bar downtown. "Friday night, 8 p.m. Wear something that matches your personality." I wore red. And when I walked into that wine bar and saw her sitting there, scrolling through her phone with a glass of Merlot in front of her, I felt something shift inside me. The grief and betrayal crystallized into something harder, sharper. Something that looked like revenge, but felt like survival. She looked up, saw me, and her face transformed into genuine delight. "Lydia? You're even more beautiful than your photos." "So are you," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I'm so glad we matched." "Me too," she said, leaning forward, her perfume, that damned perfume, wrapping around me like chains. "I have a feeling this is the beginning of something extraordinary." She had no idea how right she was. That first evening with Seraphina unfolded like a fever dream, beautiful and disturbing in equal measure. She was charming in a way that felt almost weaponized, every gesture calculated to draw me in. She laughed at my jokes, touched my hand when making a point, maintained eye contact with an intensity that would have been flattering if I didn't know what lurked beneath her polished surface. "Tell me about yourself, Lydia," she said, swirling her wine. "What complicated situation did you recently untangle?" I had prepared for this. I had rehearsed my story until it felt real, until the lies came as naturally as breathing. "A relationship that lasted too long," I said, allowing genuine emotion to color my voice. It wasn't hard. I was describing my marriage, after all, just from a different angle. I gave everything to someone who was only giving me half of themselves. You know how that feels? Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt. "I do. More than you know." "The worst part," I continued, "is realizing how much of myself I lost trying to be what they needed. I became invisible in my own life." Seraphina reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her touch was warm. Her nails painted a deep burgundy that matched the wine. "You're not invisible to me. Not even a little bit." And that was the moment I understood exactly how she'd seduced my husband. She had a gift for making people feel seen, for reflecting back the version of themselves they most wanted to believe in. She wasn't just beautiful, she was a mirror, and people fell in love with their own reflections in her eyes. But I wasn't falling. I was climbing, hand over hand, up the rope she didn't know she'd thrown me. Over the following weeks, Seraphina and I developed what she believed was a genuine connection. We met for dinner, for walks in the park, for late-night phone calls that stretched into the early hours. She told me about her childhood in Phoenix, her strained relationship with her parents, her dream of opening her own fitness studio someday. She told me she'd always felt like an outsider, like someone looking in at other people's happiness through a window. "That's why I became a trainer," she explained one night as we sat on a bench overlooking the city lights. "I help people transform themselves, become the person they've always wanted to be. There's power in that, being part of someone's metamorphosis." I nodded, storing this information away. She saw herself as a catalyst, a force of change. She probably justified her affair with Dorian the same way, helping him become the man he was always meant to be, freeing him from the constraints of a stale marriage. "Have you ever transformed anyone who didn't want to change?" I asked carefully. She was quiet for a long moment. "Some people don't know they want to change until you show them what they could become. That's not manipulation, it's revelation." "And what about the people who get hurt in the process of that revelation?" Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes pain is part of growth. You can't become something new without leaving the old behind." There it was, the philosophy she used to justify tearing apart my life. In her mind, she wasn't a homewrecker, she was a liberator. Dorian wasn't cheating. He was evolving, and I wasn't a victim. I was simply collateral damage in someone else's journey of self-discovery. The rage I felt in that moment was so intense it nearly broke my cover. I wanted to grab her by her perfectly styled hair and scream the truth into her face. I wanted to tell her that I was the old thing Dorian was leaving behind. That my pain wasn't noble growth, but senseless destruction. That she had no right to decide who got hurt and who got saved. But I swallowed it all down like bitter medicine and smiled. "That's a beautiful way to look at it," I said. During this time, I was also watching Dorian unravel. Without knowing why, he seemed to sense that something had shifted. He became more attentive at home, more suspicious, constantly checking his phone with a furrow between his brows. "Everything okay at work?" I asked one evening, feigning ignorance while knowing exactly what was troubling him. "Fine," he said quickly. "Just busy. Always busy." But I'd seen the messages between him and Seraphina. She was pulling away, canceling plans, taking longer to respond. She was distracted by someone new. By me. Though Dorian had no way of knowing that. And his carefully balanced house of cards was beginning to tremble. Here's something I learned during those weeks of deception. There's a special kind of power in knowing things other people don't. Every time Dorian kissed my cheek and told me he loved me, I knew he was thinking of her. Every time Seraphina squeezed my hand and told me I was special, I knew she was sleeping with my husband behind my back. I held their secrets like cards against my chest, and they had no idea they were playing a game they'd already lost. But knowledge is a double-edged sword. The more time I spent with Seraphina, the more complicated my feelings became. I had expected to hate every moment in her presence. Instead, I found myself grudgingly fascinated by her complexity. She was selfish and broken and devastatingly lonely. A woman who had learned to take what she wanted because she'd never been given anything freely. One night, after too much wine, she told me about the married man she was seeing. "He's not happy with his wife," she said, her words slightly slurred. "They stay together out of habit, not love. I'm not breaking up a marriage. It's already broken. I'm just showing him there's something better." "What if you're wrong?" I asked, my heart pounding. "What if the wife isn't as oblivious as you think?" Seraphina laughed, a sound that sent ice down my spine. "Trust me, she has no idea. Women like her never do. They're so busy playing the perfect wife that they forget to pay attention. Women like her. Women like me." "What makes you so sure?" I pressed. "Because he tells me everything." She nags him about work. She doesn't understand his ambitions. She's let herself go since they got married. She's more interested in her little party planning business than in being a real partner. Seraphina shrugged. "He says being with her feels like wearing a suit that doesn't fit anymore." Every word was a knife, but I kept my face neutral. So these were the lies Dorian had told to justify his betrayal. I nagged. I didn't understand. I'd let myself go. My career was insignificant. I was the problem, the obstacle, the ill-fitting suit. But here's what struck me most. Seraphina believed every word. She genuinely thought she was the hero of this story, rescuing a trapped man from a loveless marriage. She had no idea that the version of me Dorian had described bore no resemblance to reality, that he had rewritten our history to cast himself as a victim rather than a villain. What would you do if you discovered your partner had been painting you as the monster to justify their betrayal? Think about that for a moment, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. The pieces of my plan were falling into place, but I needed one more thing. Proof. Not just of the affair, I had plenty of that, but of their conspiracy against me. I found it on a Saturday afternoon when Seraphina invited me to her apartment for the first time. While she was in the kitchen opening a bottle of champagne, I slipped into her bedroom and found what I was looking for. A leather journal filled with her handwriting. The entries were damning. She had documented everything. Dates, times, gifts Dorian had given her, promises he'd made about their future. But more importantly, she had written about their plans. "D says the prenup is ironclad. If V finds out about us before the divorce goes through, he could lose everything. We have to be careful. 3 more months, then he'll file. By summer, we'll be free." 3 more months. They were counting down to the destruction of my life, and they'd scheduled it like a business meeting. I photographed every page, my hands steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. Then I replaced the journal exactly where I'd found it and returned to the living room just as Seraphina emerged with 2 glasses of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. "To the truth." She didn't catch the irony. She never did. That night, I lay awake beside Dorian, listening to him breathe. He slept peacefully, untroubled by guilt, his conscience apparently clear. I studied his face in the darkness, the face I had loved for 12 years, the face I had imagined growing old beside. I felt nothing. The love had drained out of me slowly, like water from a bathtub, leaving nothing behind but cold porcelain. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was simply done. Done pretending. Done waiting. Done playing the fool. Tomorrow, I would set the final stage. Tomorrow, I would invite Seraphina to dinner, under the guise of taking our relationship to the next level. But this dinner would be at a restaurant Dorian and I frequented, a restaurant where I had booked a table for the same evening under his name. They would arrive separately, expecting to meet their respective lovers, and find themselves face to face with each other, and me. But the dinner was only the beginning. The true revenge was still to come. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I smiled in the darkness. Seraphina thought she was in control. Dorian thought he was clever. They were both about to learn that the woman they'd underestimated was the most dangerous player at the table. And I was done playing nice. The restaurant was called Lumiere, a French establishment with white tablecloths and soft lighting that made everyone look beautiful. It was where Dorian had proposed, where we'd celebrated every anniversary, where we'd gone after my mother's funeral when I couldn't stand the emptiness of our house and needed somewhere public to hide my grief. It was the perfect place for an ending. I arrived early, dressed in the same black dress I'd worn on our 10th anniversary, a deliberate choice, though only I would appreciate the symbolism. The maitre d', who knew me well, led me to the table I'd specifically requested. Visible from the entrance, impossible to miss. "Will Mr. Mercer be joining you this evening?" he asked. "Oh yes," I said. "He just doesn't know it yet." The man raised an eyebrow, but was too professional to comment. Instead, he simply nodded and retreated, leaving me alone with a glass of wine and 18 months' worth of planned vindication. Seraphina arrived first, exactly as I'd expected. She was wearing a green dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist. She scanned the room, looking for me, for Lydia, and when our eyes met, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Lydia, you look stunning!" She crossed the room and bent to kiss my cheek, filling my senses with that familiar jasmine and sandalwood. "I'm so glad you picked this place. Very romantic." "I thought it was time we had a more intimate conversation," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "There's something I need to tell you." She sat down, her expression curious but unworried. "Sounds serious. Should I be concerned?" "Not yet. Let's wait for our other guest first." "Other guest? I thought this was just us." Before I could respond, the restaurant door opened again. I watched Seraphina's face as she registered the new arrival. Dorian, in his best suit, carrying a bouquet of red roses that were obviously not meant for me. The color drained from her cheeks. Why is... Dorian spotted her at the same moment. He stopped mid-stride, the roses slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. His eyes darted between Seraphina and me, trying to calculate how this impossible situation could be happening. "Hello, darling," I said pleasantly. "Why don't you join us? We have so much to discuss." The next few seconds lasted an eternity. Dorian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Seraphina's hand gripped the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles went white. Other diners were starting to stare, sensing the tension radiating from our table. Finally, Dorian found his voice. "Vivienne, I can explain." "Sit down," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough steel that he obeyed immediately. "I think we're past explanations, don't you?" He fell into the chair beside Seraphina, who still seemed frozen in shock. Up close, they looked almost comical. Two people who had thought they were so clever, so untouchable, reduced to confused children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "You know," I continued conversationally, "I spent weeks trying to figure out how you two could do this, how you could look me in the face every day and lie, how you could plan a future together while I was busy planning my own destruction." "Vivienne," Seraphina started. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" I turned to her with mock confusion. Oh, wait, that's right. You know me as Lydia, the lonely woman with the complicated past, the one you've been trying to seduce for the past month. Tell me, Seraphina, did you ever consider the irony of pursuing a woman while sleeping with her husband? The realization hit her visibly. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again as the full scope of my deception became clear. You set me up. I learned from the best, I replied, nodding toward Dorian. My husband is quite the teacher when it comes to deception. Dorian leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. Vivienne, please, let's talk about this somewhere private. We can work something out. Work something out? I laughed, and the sound was colder than I'd intended. Like how you worked out that leaving me would be too expensive unless you found a way to make me look crazy? Or unstable? Seraphina, did he tell you about that part? About how he planned to gaslight me into seeming unreasonable so the divorce would go more smoothly? I pulled out my phone and laid it on the table, displaying a screenshot of one of their text conversations. Seraphina's own words stared back at her. Just make her think she's losing it. Question everything she says. Eventually, she'll doubt herself enough that no one will believe her. I have everything, I continued. Every message, every hotel receipt, every lie you told your secretary about where you were going. And my personal favorite, I swiped to another image. Your journal, Seraphina. Very detailed, very incriminating. I'm sure the divorce lawyers will find it fascinating reading. Dorian's face had gone gray. You can't use any of that in court. It's illegally obtained. Actually, I can. The texts are from a phone registered in both our names. The credit card statements are from our joint account. And the journal? I shrugged. Seraphina showed it to me herself. I have witnesses who saw us together, who can testify that she's shared these details willingly with a woman she believed was her romantic interest. For a long moment, no one spoke. The reality of their situation was settling in. I had outmaneuvered them at every turn. But I wasn't finished. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling a folder from my bag. Dorian, you're going to sign these divorce papers tonight. You're going to give me the house, 70% of our joint assets, and a generous settlement that will allow me to rebuild the life you tried to burn to the ground. In exchange, I won't publish the evidence I've gathered. That's extortion, he sputtered. It's negotiation. And you should take the deal, because the alternative involves your partners at the firm seeing exactly how you've been using company time and resources to conduct your affair. The hotel room you billed as a client dinner? The business trips that were actually romantic getaways? I imagine they'd take a dim view of that kind of misuse of funds. Dorian's face went from gray to white. His career was everything to him. His identity, his pride, his sense of self-worth. The threat of professional ruin was far more effective than any emotional appeal I could have made. And you, I turned to Seraphina, are going to resign from your gym and find employment elsewhere, preferably in another state. If I ever see your face again, if you ever contact my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, I will make sure that every potential employer, every potential partner, every person who might possibly care knows exactly what kind of woman you are. Seraphina had recovered some of her composure. Her eyes glittered with something between fury and reluctant admiration. You really had us fooled. You really underestimated me. All those conversations we had, all those moments, was any of it real? I considered the question seriously before answering. You told me once that some people don't know they want to change until you show them what they could become. That transformation requires leaving the old behind. You were right about that. I stood up, gathering my bag and the unsigned divorce papers. I'm the woman you helped transform, Seraphina. The old Vivienne, trusting, naive, willing to look the other way. She's gone. You burned her to the ground without even realizing it. And what rose from those ashes? I smiled, and for the first time, I let them see the full extent of my anger. Is a woman who will never be underestimated again. I left the papers on the table and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind me, I heard Dorian calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The ball was in their court now, and they both knew they had no winning moves left. The night air was cool against my heated skin. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, breathing deeply, letting the adrenaline slowly drain from my system. I had done it. I had faced them both and emerged victorious. But as I walked toward my car, I realized that victory felt different than I'd imagined. There was no triumphant rush, no sense of justice served, just a hollow ache where my marriage used to be, and the exhausting knowledge that the hardest part was still to come. Because revenge, I was learning, is only the beginning. What happens after, the rebuilding, the healing, the long process of becoming whole again, that's where the real work begins. And I was just getting started. The divorce papers arrived signed on my doorstep 3 days later. Dorian had agreed to everything: the house, the assets, the settlement. No negotiations, no counteroffers. He knew he was beaten. I expected to feel triumph when I saw his signature on the final page. Instead, I felt nothing but exhaustion. 12 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legal documents and a certified mail envelope. It seemed impossible that something so monumental could be distilled into ink on paper. The following weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and therapists. I had won the battle, but I was still wounded from the war. Some nights, I would wake at 3 a.m, reaching for a body that wasn't there anymore, and have to remind myself that he was gone, that he had chosen to be gone long before I'd ever discovered the truth. Seraphina kept her word and disappeared. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved to Portland, started a new job, tried to reinvent herself. I tried not to think about her too much, but sometimes she haunted my dreams. Not as a villain, but as something more complicated. A mirror of what I might have become if circumstances had been different. It was during this period of rebuilding that I discovered something I hadn't anticipated. I was not alone. The first message came through social media from a woman named Amara. I saw your post about divorce recovery. I'm going through something similar. Would you be willing to talk? I had started an anonymous blog documenting my journey, not the revenge part, just the healing. It was meant to be a personal outlet, a way to process my emotions without burdening my already overwhelmed friends and family. I hadn't expected anyone to actually read it, but Amara had found it, and then Josephine, and then Marguerite, and then dozens more women from all over the country who had been through some version of what I had experienced. Betrayal, gaslighting, the slow erosion of identity that happens when you love someone who's actively working to undermine you. Their stories broke my heart and mended it at the same time. I wasn't unique in my pain. I wasn't alone in my confusion. The things I'd been told made me weak. My trust, my devotion, my willingness to believe the best in people were actually things that made me human. Amara became my closest friend during this period. She was a therapist herself, which perhaps explained her intuitive understanding of what I was going through. We talked every day, sharing our wounds and our small victories. You know what I admire most about you? She said one evening during a video call. You didn't just survive what happened to you. You transformed it into something meaningful. I don't feel very transformed, I admitted. I still have nightmares. I still catch myself wondering what I did wrong. The nightmares will fade. And the wondering? She shook her head. That's not about you. That's about trying to make sense of senseless behavior. Some people are just broken in ways that have nothing to do with the people they hurt. I thought about Seraphina's journal, about the lonely woman who had written those pages, about the childhood wounds she had mentioned, the desperate need to feel powerful by controlling others. She had been broken long before she ever met Dorian. My husband had simply provided an opportunity for her damage to manifest. Did understanding make forgiveness possible? I wasn't sure, but it made the anger easier to carry. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I sold the house with the red front door, the house where I had imagined raising children, growing old, building a life, the house that had become a monument to everything I'd lost. My mother thought I was making a mistake. You won that house, she reminded me. You fought for it. I fought for it because he wanted it, I replied. Now I realize I don't want it at all. I never did. It was always his dream, and I just convinced myself it was mine too. With the proceeds from the sale, I did something unexpected. I rented an apartment downtown, close to the theater and the restaurants and the pulse of city life. I adopted a cat named Zelda, who had been returned to the shelter twice for being too independent. And I started a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after devastating breakups. The organization grew faster than I ever anticipated. What started as a small support group in my living room became a network of resources, counselors, and advocates spanning multiple cities. We provided legal assistance to women navigating divorce, financial education for those starting over from nothing, and most importantly, a community of people who understood what it meant to rebuild from the ashes. It was through this work that I finally made peace with what had happened to me. Every woman I helped was proof that pain could be transmuted into purpose. Every success story was evidence that endings could become beginnings. Every tear shed in our support groups watered the seeds of something new and beautiful. I didn't forgive Dorian. I'm not sure I ever will. But I stopped needing him to apologize, stopped waiting for closure that would never come. I found my own closure in the lives I was helping to transform. And then, on a rainy Tuesday evening exactly 2 years after that dinner at Lumiere, I received a message that changed everything all over again. It was from Seraphina. I know I have no right to contact you. I know you probably hate me, but I need to tell you something. Please. My first instinct was to delete it, to block her number, to pretend I'd never seen it. I had built a good life in the ruins of the one she'd helped destroy. Why would I risk that peace by opening old wounds? But curiosity, and perhaps something gentler, something I wasn't ready to name, made me pause. My finger hovered over the delete button for a long moment before I typed back a single word. Okay. Her reply came immediately, as if she'd been waiting for hours with her phone in her hand. I'm back in the city. There's someone you need to meet. Please, it's important. Against every rational instinct, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop on neutral ground, not the wine bar where we'd first connected, not any of the places where Lydia and Seraphina had built their fake relationship. This was new territory, appropriate for whatever new chapter was about to unfold. Seraphina looked different, older certainly, but also smaller somehow, as if some essential part of her had deflated. The polished confidence I remembered was gone, replaced by something more tentative, more human. She wasn't alone. Beside her sat a young woman who couldn't have been more than 23 or 24. She had dark hair like Seraphina, but her eyes were a startling shade of gray that seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. Vivienne, Seraphina said. This is my daughter, Cassandra. She's the reason I needed to talk to you. I blinked, recalibrating everything I thought I knew. You have a daughter? I didn't know either, Cassandra interjected. Until 6 months ago. I was adopted at birth. I only recently found Seraphina. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of emotion beneath it. And in the process of finding her, I discovered some things about my birth father. The coffee in front of me suddenly seemed very far away. The world was tilting on its axis again, just like it had that night when I first smelled another woman's perfume on my husband's collar. What things? I heard myself ask. Cassandra took a deep breath. My birth father was married when he got my mother pregnant. She was barely 19, working at a diner where he used to eat lunch. He told her he loved her, that he'd leave his wife, all the usual lies. When she got pregnant, he paid for her to go away, gave her enough money to start over somewhere else, as long as she never contacted him or told anyone about the baby. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. That man was Dorian Mercer. The world stopped. Dorian had a daughter he had abandoned before I ever met him, before our wedding, before 12 years of lies. A daughter he had paid to make disappear. That's not possible, I said, though even as I spoke, I knew it was. It was entirely, completely, devastatingly possible. Dorian, who had complained about my desire for children, who had found excuse after excuse to delay starting a family, who had ultimately convinced me that perhaps we were better off without them, that same Dorian had fathered a child 24 years ago and erased her from his history. I have the DNA results, Cassandra said quietly, pulling a folder from her bag. And the bank records from when he paid off my birth mother. And letters he wrote to her, threatening legal action if she ever came forward. I looked at Seraphina, trying to understand her role in all this. Why are you here? Why did you bring her to me? Seraphina met my eyes without flinching. Because when Cassandra found me, she was looking for answers about her biological parents. I did some digging into Dorian's past. I still had contacts who owed me favors, and I found the paper trail. I realized that the man I had thought I loved, the man I had helped deceive you for, was even worse than either of us knew. She leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her expression. I can't undo what I did to you, Vivienne. I know that. But I can help make sure Dorian answers for all of it. Everything. The affair, the lies, and especially this. She nodded toward Cassandra. He threw away his own daughter to protect his reputation. He doesn't get to keep pretending he's a decent person. For a long moment, I said nothing. The coffee shop bustled around us, oblivious to the earthquake happening at our table. Finally, I looked at Cassandra. Really looked at her. The gray eyes that seemed so familiar, they were Dorian's eyes. The shape of her chin, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. All echoes of the man I had spent 12 years with. This young woman was a living reminder of how little I had ever really known my husband. "What do you want from me?" I asked her. Cassandra's jaw tightened. "I want justice. I want him to acknowledge what he did. And I want to know—" She hesitated, and suddenly she looked very young, very vulnerable. "I want to know if there was ever anything good about him. If I come from something besides lies and abandonment." It was the question that broke me. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the gaslighting and the calculated cruelty, There had been good moments. Early mornings when he made me coffee exactly the way I liked it. The way he cried at our wedding, overwhelmed with what seemed like genuine emotion. How he held me when my mother was sick, stroking my hair while I fell apart. Those moments had been real, even if everything else had been a lie. He was complicated, I finally said. He did terrible things, unforgivable things. But he wasn't always a monster. No one is. Cassandra nodded slowly, absorbing this. Thank you. That's helpful, actually. I turned to Seraphina. What exactly are you proposing? The organization you run, she said. The nonprofit that helps women rebuild. What if we added a legal component? Something that specifically helps victims of men like Dorian. Men who use their money and power to silence people, to make problems disappear. I have resources I can contribute, connections, and a very personal motivation to make sure women like Cassandra's birth mother aren't thrown away like garbage. It was the last thing I had expected. Seraphina, the woman who had nearly destroyed my life, offering to help me protect others from men like my husband. Why should I trust you? I asked. You shouldn't, she replied immediately. I don't deserve your trust. But Cassandra does, and so do all the other women out there who are right now being manipulated, exploited, and abandoned by men who think they're above consequences. She pulled out a checkbook and wrote a number that made my breath catch. Consider this a down payment on my debt to you. I can never fully repay what I took from you, Vivienne. But maybe I can help you protect someone else from going through the same thing. I looked at the check, then at Cassandra's hopeful face, then at Seraphina's guarded one. 2 years ago, I would never have imagined sitting across from these women, let alone considering a partnership with one of them. But 2 years ago, I was a different person. I was Vivienne the victim, the abandoned wife, the woman who'd been underestimated and betrayed. Now I was something else entirely. There are conditions, I said slowly. Full transparency. Every decision goes through my board, and if I ever find out you're manipulating me again— You won't, Seraphina interrupted. I'm done with manipulation. It cost me everything once. I'm not willing to pay that price again. I believed her. Or at least, I believed that she believed herself. Whether that was enough, only time would tell. All right, I said, extending my hand. Let's make him pay. Seraphina shook it, and for one strange moment, I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it. An acknowledgement that we had both been casualties of Dorian's lies, even if our wounds looked different. Cassandra watched us with tears in her gray eyes, Dorian's eyes, that held no trace of his cruelty. Thank you, she whispered. Both of you. And for the first time in 2 years, the emptiness inside me felt a little less vast. The lawsuit made national news. Cassandra's case, combined with the evidence I had gathered during my own divorce, painted a picture of a man who had spent 3 decades using and discarding women without consequence. When the story broke, other women came forward. 4 more, spanning 20 years, each with their own tale of manipulation and betrayal. Dorian's firm dropped him within a week. His clients abandoned him one by one. The carefully constructed image of the successful architect and devoted family man crumbled like a house built on sand. I didn't take pleasure in his destruction. Or perhaps I did, a little. I'm human, after all. But mostly, I felt a sense of closure that had nothing to do with revenge. Justice had been served. Not by my hand, but by the collective weight of all the women he had wronged, finally being allowed to speak. Cassandra became like a daughter to me over the following months. Not Dorian's daughter. She stopped referring to him that way after the trial. But mine, in a sense. The daughter I had always wanted and never had. She worked with the nonprofit, channeling her anger into something productive, and I watched her transform from a wounded young woman into a fierce advocate for others. Seraphina kept her word. The legal fund she helped establish has now assisted over 300 women in escaping abusive or exploitative situations. She never asked for recognition or credit. She simply wrote checks, made phone calls, and quietly built something meaningful from the wreckage of her past. I won't say we became friends. The history between us is too complicated, too stained for that kind of easy resolution. But we became something. Allies, perhaps. Fellow survivors of a man who had made a career out of breaking women and getting away with it. On the 1-year anniversary of the verdict that stripped Dorian of his reputation and most of his remaining assets, I received a letter. It had been forwarded multiple times, the envelope wrinkled and travel-worn. The return address was a small town in Montana, the last place I had heard Dorian was living, trying to rebuild some version of his life. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity, that same curiosity that had led me to create Lydia, to befriend Seraphina, to unravel the whole tangled mess, made me slice the envelope open with a kitchen knife. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs in Dorian's familiar handwriting, slightly shakier than I remembered. Vivienne, I know you have no reason to read this, let alone respond. But I needed to try. Not to ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve that. But to acknowledge what I did. I was a coward. For decades, I was a coward. I hurt you and Cassandra and Seraphina and all the others because I was too afraid to face the mess inside myself. I chose lies because the truth was too terrifying. I chose betrayal because loyalty would have required me to be better than I was capable of being. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Stronger than me, certainly. I should have told you that when we were married. I should have told you many things. Instead, I tried to diminish you because your strength made me feel small. That wasn't about you. It was always about me. I don't expect a response. I just needed you to know that I see, finally, what I did. And I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, but for being the kind of man who needed to be caught. D. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer with other artifacts from my past life, and closed the drawer firmly. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. That evening, I met Cassandra and Amara for dinner at a new restaurant downtown. Zelda had knocked over a plant that morning and shown no remorse whatsoever, which Cassandra found hilarious. Amara had just gotten engaged to a wonderful woman she'd met at one of our support groups. The spring air was soft with the promise of summer. "To new beginnings," Amara said, raising her glass. "Again?" I laughed. "We've toasted to new beginnings about 100 times." "And we'll toast 100 more," she replied. "That's the secret, you know. Beginnings don't run out. Every day is a chance to start something." Cassandra clinked her glass against ours. "To the women who refused to be forgotten. To the women who refused to stay silent," I added. "To the women who turned their pain into power," Amara finished. We drank, and the wine was sweet, and the evening stretched ahead of us full of possibility. Later that night, I stood on my apartment balcony and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was the restaurant where I had confronted Dorian and Seraphina. Somewhere was the wine bar where Lydia had first appeared. Somewhere were all the places that had witnessed my transformation from trusting wife to avenging force of nature to whatever I was now. A survivor, certainly, an advocate, a friend, possibly a mother in the ways that mattered. And something else, too, something I was still discovering. My phone buzzed with a text from Seraphina. The shelter expansion got approved. Groundbreaking next month. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled and typed back, I'll be there. Because that's what I had learned through all of this. That healing isn't a destination, but a direction. That the people who hurt you don't get to define you. That sometimes your greatest enemies become your greatest allies. And sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you'll ever build. My blind date was my husband's mistress, and that date, impossibly, improbably, miraculously, became the first step on the road to a life bigger and more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. The woman who walked into that restaurant 3 years ago, naive and trusting and completely unaware of what was waiting for her, she wouldn't recognize me now. And I'm glad, because I like who I've become. I earned her, scar by scar and victory by victory, and I wouldn't trade her for anything.